action.
And we are back.
That's right.
Your boy B. Haji and Marsh Daddy. We are here for another NextGen time of teaching for middle school and high school.
Yeah.
Miss you guys. We'll be seeing you soon.
Pretty excited about that.
Super excited.
About getting together
yeah.
in person, just seeing people.
Yeah. And we are here for another life lessons. That's where we take a character in the Bible and we look at their life holistically and then take out what's that thing, that truth we need to learn from them.
Yeah.
So this week we have Moses, the Moses.
Yeah. There's not another one in there anywhere, so.
Yeah, but there's like basketball player, Moses Malone.
Yeah. I don't think they were confused.
The thing about, he's on the Mount Rushmores of Bible characters. He's got to be. I mean, he's up there.
I agree with that.
We can talk about that another day. But Moses was a big deal. So I'm going to give you a little bit of just kind of an outline of his life and then walk through this. And Marshall's going to kind of lead us in some of that reading in Scripture because that's where we want to go ultimately. But Moses lived to be 120 years old, which is pretty
old.
Pretty old. I mean, I'm 29, I think.
I'm 30.
And he would have still had 91 years to go. Is that right? Yes, 91 years to go.
Quick
That's
math,
a lot. Yeah.
It is a lot.
So he lived to be 121 years old. And we can really remember a lot about him because his life is broken down into not one, not two, but 3 sections of 40 years. So we're going to be looking at that. The first is this. He lived 40 years in Egypt. Then he lived 40 more years as a shepherd in Midian, which is outside of Egypt. And then 40 more years, he led the Israelites out of Egypt and wandered around in the wilderness. So his life is easily broken down. My life is broken down in I grew up in Memphis, then I went to college, then this. But he's like 40, 40, 40. It's
a lot.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big number in the Bible too, 40.
Yeah.
That's a good bit.
Yeah. So we're just going to look at some of these life events. And really, I think the first question to ask about Moses is how did a Hebrew man get to Egypt? And a Hebrew, essentially, he was an Israelite, so he's known as a Hebrew. And so how did he get to Egypt, but not just there as a Hebrew man, but how was he accepted into their ways? So, Marshall, why don't you take it from there?
Yeah, so around the time he was born, Pharaoh issues this big decree to kill all the male children who were Hebrews. So
and
you can brush over that pretty quick. That's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
By the way.
And he knew that there was some sort of king or Messiah or something coming from them. And so he didn't want any of those people to challenge his throne. Because the Pharaoh, Egypt, they were like a country above other countries. They were rich. They had a lot of things going. I mean, you look at the pyramids. I don't see any other pyramids in other places. They were doing things that other places weren't. So the Pharaoh had an extreme amount of power.
Yeah. I mean, Egypt was it.
Mm-hmm.
In that time, it was the place.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to compare it to.
Just like, you think about the Roman Empire and,
like New York, maybe. I don't know. The
America.
Yeah.
I mean, we're kind of top dogs as far as military, at least.
Yeah. So.
But, yeah.
So Moses is born, and then, they got to hide him. They got to get rid of him. They don't want him to die, so they take this basket. She makes a basket, and the mom does, and she puts Moses in the basket and just puts him in the Nile.
I mean, can you imagine that? Taking your son, your firstborn son, and then knowing that he couldn't stay with you, so this act of just almost a last prayer to just hopefully something good happens to him.
Yeah.
So she sends him afloat on the Nile River.
Yeah. Which, by the way, just I think in our head, in my head, maybe because I've seen the Prince of Egypt, she just puts him in the water, but like there's crocodiles in there, like there's a lot to this story.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes, puts him in a basket, puts him in the river, and he goes. Then ultimately, he gets found by a servant, and and she opens it. She sees a baby. We see this all in Exodus 2. So the little boy's crying. She felt sorry for the baby, and she even says that she realizes it's one of the Hebrew children. And here's what's crazy. This little tag in the story is then Moses' sister was actually kind of watching him, was following along the river, and so she runs up. She's like, "Should I go find a Hebrew lady to help nurse the baby?" And the princess says, "Yeah," and then she went and actually got Moses' mom. So it was actually pretty cool that then the Lord just took care of Moses and the mom. I just love how the Lord does stuff like that.
So Moses grows up in their household, in the royal family's household, as an adopted son.
Yep.
Even though his mom kind of nursed him, but really he was raised as an Egyptian.
Yeah.
I mean, Acts 7:22. This is in the New Testament. It talks about Moses, but it says that Moses learned all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and in deeds.
Yeah.
So he wasn't he wasn't raised as a Hebrew slave.
He was brilliant.
He was raised
brilliant.
as an Egyptian
super smart.
pharaoh.
Yes.
Would have been
the best education. Yeah. Which I think is really cool because you ultimately know what the Lord's doing there. So, yeah. So just cool stuff. So he gets brought in, raised as an Egyptian, and then something to that. So he's super wealthy now.
Yeah.
Super rich.
I mean,
which he wouldn't have known,
Yeah.
He was a baby, so he just, grew up with it.
Yeah.
So,
that's just awesome. You were gonna be killed, and then now you're in the king's house.
Yeah. You're the guy.
And so that begs the question of why did Moses leave Egypt? Because if he is wealthy, if he is potentially going to have power and things like that, why did he leave after those 40 years? And so I think that takes us to Exodus 2:11 through 15.
So you don't get much Moses' story pretty much after he's found as a baby. You really don't get anything. And then all of a sudden, just starts in starting in Exodus 2:11, and just many years later, and he's grown up and he's out walking around, he's visiting people, and he's starting to notice, how hard they're making, the Hebrews work, and he sees somebody getting hurt, like getting beat, and verse 13, Moses goes out, he sees two Hebrew men fighting. Why are you beating up your friend? And then they kind of talk back to him, I skipped there, but anyway.
Yeah,
I skipped
in verse 12, though.
Yeah, sorry.
So he's out and about, and he sees a Hebrew getting beat by an Egyptian slave driver.
So
and then in verse 12, it says, after looking around in all directions to make sure that no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid the body in the sand.
Yeah. So there's a lot to that there. So he kills him, hides him in the sand, and obviously it goes on to realize that they pretty much knew. Somehow the people knew.
Yeah,
so
somebody
panics.
Saw them.
Mm-hmm. So he panics. Verse 14, Moses is afraid. Everybody must know what I did. And sure enough, Pharaoh heard. And so then Pharaoh wants to kill Moses because of what happened. So Moses flees.
He kind of betrayed the Egyptians.
Yeah. So now he is gone. So just like that. Loses it all.
Yeah.
And he
loses it. He runs for fear of his life to the land of Midian, which is just a totally different environment. And that is where people with lots of sheep are there, like shepherds, just traveling around. And essentially what we know is that Moses goes there and he goes to a water well, and there are 7 daughters there, and he helps them out. He gets water for them. He feeds their flocks and gives them things to drink. And so they find out kind of, well, what are you doing there today? And the shepherd there says to, what verse is it? To essentially come on with him. And then in verse 21, it says, in verse 21, it says, Moses accepted the invitation, and he settled there with him. And in that time, Reuel gave Moses his daughter Zipporah to be his wife. So not only did he become a shepherd after leaving the Pharaoh's house, he gets married there.
Yeah.
And so we know that then another 40 years goes by, and he's a shepherd, and he's doing those things.
So pretty much you get an 80-year picture of his life and like just a condensed thing, because we know it's the last 40 that's so huge. So the first 40 grows up in Egypt. Second 40, he's out living in Midian, and he's taking care of
and he's content. I mean, he's married. He's doing his thing. But toward the end of chapter 2, God hears the groaning of his people and remembers this covenant from long ago, and that it's through the people of Israel. And it says that God looked down on the people of Israel and knew it was time to act. And that takes us now to a new section of why did Moses go back to Egypt?
Yeah, which I think now brings us to like a big thing we all know about is the burning bush, which I think we talked about it earlier. I think it's cool to note that he didn't leave Egypt and immediately happened the burning bush. Like he left Egypt, and there was 40 years of him living out here being a shepherd, and then the burning bush shows up. I think that's just a cool historical thing just to know. It wasn't like instant. There was a process. I think there's a lot you could say to that, how the Lord, there's a longer journey, and the Lord's over all of it.
Yeah, well, he has a major failure. He kind of leaves for fear of his life and shame, and then he just becomes content to get by.
Yeah. And I'd imagine a lot of that 40 years, he's probably struggling, like maybe looking over his shoulder a little bit. Maybe I had everything, now I don't,
Yeah.
Probably a rough 40 years for him, like internally,
Yeah.
Even though he gets a family and all that, there's probably a lot going on. So the burning bush, so now we jump to Exodus 3, it's burning bush. So he's 80 years old, and God shows up, and
verses 1 through 3. It's pretty awesome.
Moses tending the flock, and he's out in the wilderness, and he comes to Sinai, the mountain of God, and an angel of the Lord appears to Moses in a blazing fire from the middle of the bush, and Moses stared in amazement. And though the bush was engulfed in flames, it did not burn up. Super cool. And this is amazing, Moses said. Why isn't this bush burning up? I must go see it. And when the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, he then calls to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses says, here I am. This is now where the big story of Moses kind of takes off.
I would be freaking out. This bush is talking to you.
Yeah, there's different times back then, man. I'd done the same thing. I'd have been like, I'm going to go away. I'm going to not, I'm with you.
It's on fire.
Yeah.
But it's not burning up.
It's just a continual burn, Yeah.
It'd be crazy.
And the Lord tells him, who he is. I'm the God of your father, Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. And Lord tells him, I've seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I've heard their cries. I'm aware of their suffering. So I'm going to rescue them. And, and then it kind of gets into where,
in verse 10, it says, Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt.
Yeah, I wonder if the whole time Moses, when he's like saying like, hey, I keep hearing the cries of my people, if Moses is like thinking like, you're going to ask me to do something. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh my.
You're going to ask me for something.
So God directs him, commands him. He says, I'm going to send you there to Pharaoh. And then this is what's crazy in verse 11. It says, But Moses protested to God.
Yeah.
Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?
Yeah. So he's talking to a
burning bush that says that I am. It says, it calls out and it knows its name, all of that. And then he puts kind of the attention on himself, on his own abilities. It says, who am I? Who am I to be able to lead these people?
Yeah. Starts doubting, and then God reminds him of who he is, and
God says, I will be with you.
Yep. Yeah. So then Moses goes on even more. What if they don't believe me? What if, and I'll be your, he's like, what's in your hand? And Moses says, a staff. which I think in my mind, when I think of Moses, he's always got that staff, because he does. He does. In my mind, if I see Moses, he's just got a staff. But God says, Moses, throw the staff on the ground. He throws it on the ground, and immediately it turns into a snake. So there's that. Yeah, I'd be like, I'm out. I'm good. Yeah, so it turns into a snake. Then God tells him this: reach out and grab its tail. What? Nah. Well, he does, and then what happens? It turns back into a staff. And
maybe snakes were different back. Maybe they weren't scared of them like we are.
No, it says he jumped back. Yeah, he was scared. Yes, I guarantee he was scared. We can ask him in heaven one day. Be like, hey, man, what do you think about snakes? He's like, hate them. Hate them. I don't know. But then the Lord's like, I'm going to perform these signs. Put your hand in your cloak, bring it out. And he does, and it's covered in leprosy. And he does it again. It's healed. And he kind of keeps telling him like, hey, do these things, do these things.
And we could brush over those. Those are crazy miracles to where God is just trying to show his power. And that he's saying, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to do these miraculous things to make them believe. Yeah. Yet Moses is still protesting, it says. That he's like, they're not going to believe me. Or they're going to say, well, God never appeared to you.
Yeah. Then, in verse 10, he continues to pretty much beg and say, not me. And then he says, instead of them believing me, he's like, well, you know what, God? Like, I'm not very good with words. I've never been good with words. I'm not now. And even though you've spoken to me, I'll get tongue-tied and my words will get tangled. I love this verse, what the Lord says in Exodus 4:11. Says, the Lord asked Moses, who makes a person's mouth? Who decides whether people speak or do not speak, hear or do not hear, see or do not see? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will be with you and tell you what to speak, and I will instruct you in what to say. So I love that. The Lord's like, I got you. Moses continues again to say, please send anyone else. Like, at some point, you'd think he'd be like, okay. And he's like, nope, no. And then it says in verse 14, I think this is good to know, that the Lord kind of gets angry with them. And he's like, all right, you have a brother, so he'll come with you. He never took Moses out of the equation. He was like, you're still going, but I'll just, your brother will kind of be the person who will speak more. He'll be your mouthpiece, but I'll tell you what to tell him to say.
And he even says, and look, he's on his way to meet you now.
Yep.
He'll be delighted to see you. Yeah. It's like, in Spider-Man Far From Home, when Spider-Man's trying to run away, and Nick Fury just makes it, he makes it to where it still happens. Yeah. God's like, well, you're going to try to run, or you can't do it. Well, there's Aaron.
Yeah.
Oh, what do you know?
Yeah, at what point in this, I wonder, was Moses like, this is going to happen?
There's nothing.
Yeah, I'm not getting no out of this one. Yeah. So, I think you could talk about a ton of little moments in there. So then he goes back to Egypt, which, man, what a big deal. Goes back to Egypt, and then they start talking to Pharaoh. Hey, we're here. The Lord told us to tell you, let his people go. And that's where some of the big, more famous stories, I guess, from this start.
And that's and this is where we come to the story to which it's called, the whole book is called Exodus.
Yeah.
Which kind of sounds like exit, right? So Exodus is talking about the coming out of the people of God. Yeah. So it's this book is about them leaving Egypt and the Exodus. Well, Moses was called to lead them in that act, in the Exodus. Yeah. And so
Pharaoh's like adamantly saying no. We'll hit him real quick. Adamantly saying no. There's this really cool moment in Exodus 5 where the staff becomes a snake, and then Pharaoh's magicians kind of do the same thing, but then Moses' snake, or God's snake, eats their snake. Just crazy little things like that. But there's a plague of blood with the water.
Yeah, he does all these miracles, and then he warns Pharaoh.
Yeah.
And he's like, look, you haven't let my people go, so these things are going to happen. And they're plagues. They're awful things, and they keep getting worse, and they go through this progression that it really oppresses the people there. Mm-hmm. But Pharaoh still just stands his ground.
Yes,
hardens
he does.
His heart.
Is it the frogs, the gnats, the flies, the livestock? Which
I just want to say, if I was in Pharaoh's spot, and for some reason I was denying the Israelites, it would be the gnats or
Sure,
flies.
it wouldn't
I'm
maybe
out.
get so far. Sure, I get you.
Like,
I get that.
I've had a bug fly in my ear around a campfire and be on my eardrum and get stuck in there.
Ooh, pretty miserable.
It was the second most painful thing in my life.
I believe it. I think about Moses
It
during
was
all this.
running around in my eardrum.
Yeah.
And so now if I hear like any buzzing around here, I like have a panic attack. I'm like, oh,
Wow, I didn't know that about you. It's good to know.
it's all.
But I think about Moses. Imagine how frustrated he's getting. He's like, because you notice the plagues get worse every time, right?
Right.
And so he's like, okay, he said no again. It's, he's probably getting frustrated. And then
I hate the frogs.
Whew, yeah.
Frogs everywhere?
Yeah.
Bruh.
Yeah. I mean, for real, the gnat one's pretty bad. Like, then there's the hail, super bad hail. Then the locust. Just keep going.
And
then the darkness.
The darkness, which I just feel like that would just be terrifying.
Yes. Just
I mean,
complete
I think
darkness.
it's not just like nighttime all the time. I think it would be like
And
you
also,
can't see
yeah, I
your
think-
hand.
Yeah,
like it's gonna
you
be
gotta
the
remember,
extreme.
they didn't have electricity. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like, oh, it's nighttime, but there's street lights. That's not a thing. Like,
I wonder if God didn't allow fire to work.
I don't know. Complete darkness.
That would be cool.
Complete darkness. Maybe. But it probably, man, because it's just,
And then he
complete
gets to the
darkness.
last thing and he's like, all right, enough.
yeah, then it gets real heavy. It's the death of the firstborn, which so much to talk about there. Where
Yes.
they put the blood over their doors, and the death angel passes their houses, like, which is a symbol of Christ, that his blood is over us.
Right.
So so much to talk about there. I mean,
Yeah, there's so much you can talk about with the plagues, but I think the real point that we're talking about here, though, is Moses.
Yes.
Through all of this, his faith is being tested. Like
Yes.
his confidence in what God told him to do.
Yeah.
Is it worth it? Is it actually gonna work? Like when I take that step of faith, can I be confident in that? Or in my abilities, those areas I think I'm weak in, when I try to do that thing like speaking or whatever it may be, is God going to come through? And with these plagues, God is showing his power over and over again.
Yeah.
But Pharaoh is choosing not to relent.
Yeah. So
to
then
it.
there's this big one, kills Pharaoh's firstborn son. So
Right.
he's like, fine, go. So not only do they get to leave, but they get all the treasures of Egypt.
Yes.
Okay, so there's that. So on the way out, the Egyptians are just giving them all their treasure. Take
Yeah.
it, go. So now they leave. Bible says like a mighty army. So now they leave. But then I think there's another big moment that probably really tests Moses. They get to the Red Sea, and
Well,
there's
before that, though, what's a cool thing just to know, verse 21, is when the Israels leave, the Lord, it says that the Lord went ahead of them and guided them during the day with a pillar of cloud and provided light at night with a pillar of fire.
yeah,
And this allowed them to travel by day and night.
yeah, pretty cool. So then they get to the Red
That's
Sea.
just cool.
I agree.
I mean,
I agree. And that's cool is that happens again. Like that's a thing that happens again
Yeah.
in the wilderness. So they get to the Red Sea, and now they're kind of backed up against the wall because what happens? Pharaoh and the Egyptians come back after them. And so now they've got Egyptians behind them, Red Sea in front of them, nowhere to go.
they got women and children,
Yeah,
giant river. There ain't no way
Nowhere
they're
to
going
get
to
out.
cross
And
it.
then obviously the big story we all know puts his, God tells him what to do, puts his staff down.
And the
Waters
water
part. They walk across. There's a really cool verse in Psalms that talks about how, I wish I knew the reference, but it just talks about how the Lord saw a road that no one else knew was there.
Yeah.
I think that's just a great
He
verse.
split the sea.
So he saw a road that nobody else saw.
That's
so,
in one of those songs.
So Exodus 14:14 says the Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. Like I love that, man. It's good.
You split the sea so I could walk
Sing it for
right
us.
through it.
So
My fears were drowned in perfect love.
can you keep singing? So I think for Moses, at this point you think, man, he's probably super confident,
Mhm.
But then, without going into super detail, I mean, you know what happens in the wilderness? The people start to rebel.
Yeah, so all these
gets
things
really-
happen, and God washed them in the water, but then the people that just saw all the power and all of his miracles and walked across dry land and the Red Sea complain and they rebel and all of these things. You know, God sends manna from heaven every day to give them food, and they hate the manna.
Yeah, it says their sandals don't wear out, like their clothes don't wear out. Like,
Yeah.
Over the Top takes care of them, and
Right.
they complain, and they start wanting Egypt again.
Yeah, they want to go back to Egypt where
And
they
this
were
is-
slaves
and I'm pretty sure
and where
it's
they
like
were beaten and
days.
oppressed.
It's not like a couple of days later. They're
Yeah.
like, we won't go back.
But
It says a lot about our human
Yes.
heart and
you could have a whole podcast on that
Yes.
too. But some things about Moses is he is still like he has a bright mark on him throughout this wilderness time. Yes, he had some failures, and there's one in specific that we will talk about. But I mean, so many moments, like he went up a mountain and God gave him the 10 Commandments, right? That's a big, big deal. I mean, even secular things kind of base their moral stuff off of those. But he gets those. The golden calf is made, so he comes back down. So they break the 10 Commandments. Not they, but he breaks them. And then he goes back up again and gets the 10 Commandments again. Just incredible things that God allows Moses to be a part of when it comes to just our history, biblical history, but also the Israelites in the wilderness. But in Numbers 20:11, there's a specific moment.
I got it.
Marshall's got it.
It says Moses raised his hand, struck the rock twice with the staff, water gushed out, and the entire community and their livestock drank to their fill. But then verse 12 says, but the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to demonstrate my holiness to the people of Israel, you will not lead them into the land I'm giving them. So the Lord said,
Moses disobeys what God is
disobeyed.
telling him to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And it said that, hey, you're not going to see their promised land. This place that they had been looking for years upon years. Ended up being 40 years total.
Yeah.
Moses did not get to go into the land.
Yeah.
God allowed him to see it from afar, but he did not allow him to go into it. And ultimately, Moses passed before getting to the promised land.
Yeah.
And that's in Deuteronomy 34.
One cool thought I had about Moses, I just thought about is when he first sees God in the burning bush, he shields his face because he's scared. And then it goes on to tell us in Exodus 30, I think it's either 30 or 33, it says that Moses would ultimately meet with the Lord face to face as the Lord speaks to a friend, and his face would be so...
And he was a friend of God.
Yeah, his face would be so bright, like, because he met with the Lord. He had to cover it up sometimes.
Wow.
So at the beginning, he's afraid to even look at him. Then talking about confidence, then it goes to where he's sitting kneecap to kneecap with the Lord, meeting with him,
Yeah.
and
He approached him boldly in faith. Confidence in who God was.
Moses' story, man, just kind of talking to it real quick, there's a million.
Yeah.
You could preach on his life
For a long time.
A super long time.
So, anyway, in 34, 1 through 6, we just see Moses' death and, how it says that the Lord buried him in a valley near Beth in Moab, but to this day no one knows that he's that place. And it says Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyesight was clear and he was as strong as ever.
Yeah.
And then I think one thing we can kind of land the plane on in verse 10, it says, there's never been another prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. So, I mean, we think about the life lesson, the progression, how Moses really did not put trust and faith in who God was there in the burning bush. And it was all about his abilities and weaknesses that he had. But then in the end, like you said, he grows so much as a leader and in his confidence, not in himself, but in the Lord, to where he meets with him face to face. And then never been another prophet like Moses who the Lord knew face to face.
Yeah. Big deal.
I mean,
So,
that's a huge
Yeah.
story arc.
Yeah, when I think of confidence, if I had to summarize it, I would just think, man, the Lord calls you to something. He's going to see you through it. He'll
Yeah.
work with you. Like, just be confident in the Lord. And anyway, that's what Moses would tell you. Like,
Well,
he
and
was faithful.
practically, when God does call us out, our first inclination is not to say yes. It's to think about, well, what are all the things in me that will keep that from happening?
Sure.
But that's not, not for us to worry about when God desires us
Yeah.
to do something.
Yeah. Moses is great. So students, I just encourage you to check out. Man, Moses has got a lot of great stuff in there. Read it
Mhm.
slowly and, just see what the Lord did. It's cool stuff.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
and super kind of random, but The Prince of Egypt is a good movie.
It is.
I haven't seen it in a long
It's
time.
not like
I'm not saying-
100% accurate
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah.
It
But-
takes liberty in kind of filling in some blanks.
Yeah.
I don't
But
necessarily
good movie.
think. Yeah,
It's good. It's just a good movie.
it's
But-
not like
Just throwing that out there. If you haven't seen it, check it out. They sing. So,
I used to when I was younger. I would get that movie mixed up with the llama movie. What was that?
no, I don't know.
They're laughing in the back. You guys know
what
I'm
llama
talking about.
movie?
Emperor's New Groove.
Nope.
I just for some reason I got them mixed up because he's like royalty and he becomes a llama,
Sure.
and Moses is royalty and he becomes a shepherd.
Cool. I've never seen the Emperor's New
I mean,
Groove, so-
that really is not that far of a stretch.
Guess not. I've just never seen it.
Royalty to farm animal. Royalty to farm animal owner.
Yeah. Hey, there you go. All right. Students, we're looking forward to seeing you soon. It's coming.
Right.
Super excited about it.
What's Prince of Egypt? There are some songs in there that I can still remember.
If you kind of give them to me, I can probably remember them.
I'm going blank.
I am too. I don't. There's the one I can remember off the top of my head. It's like, you will when you believe. I don't. And I know like the tune. I just don't know it.
You know,
Yeah.
when you believe.
There can
And be
miracles.
miracles when you believe.
We'll leave that to the movie to sing.
Hey, there can be miracles when you believe. And read it.
There you go.
All right,
We love you.
peace out.